So let me give you a little background. Any new faces here? Anybody first time? Okay. I got into gardening through the back door of a restaurant. I was working in the restaurant as a waiter up in Maine, and the chef that I was working for was driving to Boston to buy arugula and radicchio, which sounds crazy right now, but at that time, back in the early 80s, there was nobody selling that up there, despite the fact that one of the best seed companies in the country is up there. So he was driving to Boston every other week to buy produce, and I said, you know, for the amount of money you spend in gas alone, we could be growing this ourselves. And he says, I can't. He's running a restaurant and a B&B. And I said, well, I can, because I was working nights. You know, we only served, they did breakfast and I did dinners, basically. So I started out with a little garden that was about as big as half of this room. And 5 years later, I had 5 acres. And I only sold to restaurants, I only sold to chefs. I had a very specialized market. I determined the things that I was going to grow, not by what was in the seed catalogs, but by what was in culinary magazines. And all of my clients were chefs, were restaurants. And that's a very different market than what most of the farmers up in Maine were doing. What are they growing? They were growing pine trees, blueberries, potatoes, and broccoli, and marijuana. Those are the 5 big crops up there. And so when I started looking for radicchio and celeriac and kohlrabi and oyster root, I had something that I could market that nobody else was really, no one had access to easily. So I kind of had to learn on the fly a lot of things. A lot of it was going to the library in Augusta and reading, because this was before all of this information was available on the internet. And there was a lot of trial and error, more error at first than success, but eventually I managed to build a pretty decent business. And I stayed in the restaurant industry for a couple of decades, almost 30 years, but I became more and more interested in feeding the people who couldn't afford to go to restaurants. And basically that's the primary focus of my business now, is raising healthy, organic, highly nutritious food for people who have limited access to it. And that's pretty much what gardeners do too. They are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to grow something that they know what's in it. They're trying to grow it very nutritiously, and they're trying to grow things that actually taste good. And there's a direct correlation between nutrients and flavor. If your vegetables taste good, they're probably very nutritious. And one of the advantages of highly nutritious food is that you can eat less of it. And with a lot of the population in the United States today, particularly low-income households, they don't have access to nutritious food. And that compounds the problem. Because they don't have nutritious food, they buy cheaper food. Because they buy cheaper food, they end up having issues with diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, their obesity. All of this is related to not having access to healthy food. So it's been kind of my mission for the last almost a decade now. That's kind of the focus of what I've been doing. Last year, Amy, who runs the library, said she wanted to start a seed library. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And the concept with the seed library kind of dovetails with what I like to do. It makes growing healthy, nutritious food more accessible for everybody. Now, granted, we're in North Stonington, and we have a relatively limited low-income population here, but it's here. But we do in the New London area, in the county, we have a lot of people who are experiencing food insecurity. So there's definitely an opportunity for me and for anybody to help to try to alleviate that problem. I always say at the beginning of my talks that I try to avoid politics, but it's kind of unavoidable, and it is, in fact, related to the problems that I'm working with. So right now, there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of support for nonprofit organizations, the ones that I work with, who are trying to alleviate the food insecurity problem. So there's more need than ever for people to be involved in producing their own food or helping to produce and create access to people for healthy food who don't otherwise have that access. You're not bothering me if you want to stay. Talk about it. It's fine. So that being said, I think this seed library concept is really important. And if the only thing you do is come here and get seeds, or come here to these talks and get information, or find a community of people with whom you have common interest and create a larger community, then I think we're succeeding in some of this. But the seed library itself is an important thing. I think we probably have well over 100 people now who have come here to take seeds. And there's no requirement that anybody bring them back. We hope that is what happens. But more than anything else, we just hope that people are growing their own food and providing their own nutrition and establishing their own self-sustainable household. So all those things are good. The other thing that's good is we're getting more people into the library, which is what Amy's primary interest was. So the topic tonight, we're going to talk about getting outside. Has anybody planted anything yet outside in their garden? What'd you get in?
Strawberries, blackberries, asparagus, lettuce, and rhubarb.
Nice. When? Last week?
Last week.
Yeah. How about you?
I did the stuff in the basement as you suggested 2 weeks ago.
Good.
And they're all sprouting and wonderful.
Yep.
Up in there.
Plenty of light?
Now they're in the living room now.
Yeah. Who else? Anybody else plant? What'd you get?
Planted all my peas.
Mm-hmm.
To make
Did you do it on St. Patrick's Day?
It was
Pretty close?
before St. Patrick's Day, and then things went sour.
Yeah.
And planted all my stuff inside. And there's rhubarb that'll be ready to pick in a week if the weather doesn't go bad. And plenty of stuff. We've eaten a lot of spinach.
Yeah. Out of the hoop house? Good. Yeah. Spinach isn't bolting yet?
No, no.
Good. It's the best in March. February, spinach in February and March, you never find it taste better than then. Pardon me?
What is in your house?
I've got a few seedlings started, but mostly lawnmower. Yeah. I have 2 heat mats going in there. I've got tomatoes, leeks, peppers, eggplants, onions. I've got some bok choy, fennel. It's not a lot. It sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot. But I also have peas outside, and they're sprouted. So that's, that's the thing. To me, New England, it's like, get your peas in on St. Patrick's Day. That was always kind of the mantra, get your peas in by St. Patrick's Day. When it snows that day, that makes it a little trickier. We've not had a good spring for getting things up and running early. So the last 2 days, yes?
You don't plant by the moon? Because this weekend's the moon.
This week?
I'm waiting for my peas to go in with the moon.
Yeah. And
I don't know if it makes a difference, but somebody told me it did.
I think it does make a difference, to be honest with you. And I've seen some interesting essays about gravitational pull, tidal effects, and that sort of thing. I know people who plant, I want to say religiously, but that's dangerous, who plant regularly by the moon, and it seems to work for some people. So I certainly wouldn't discourage it. Right. But it's been a really, really tough spring because it's just been so wet. And we need the water. It may not seem like we need the water right now, but down below, the groundwater, the water table is still depleted. So we really need it. And when you look at the stream out here, I'm sure you've seen it, it's moving fast. There's a lot of water running off. And we would be much better off if it was sinking in a little faster. But because the ground is so saturated, it's just not falling deeply in. And tomorrow I think we're going to see even more, which is a huge disappointment if you're planning on fishing in a river on Saturday. But so it goes. Good and bad, yeah. So I went out. We had 2 nice days. Our 2 nicest days so far. And I went out and I worked pretty much from sunrise to sundown, which is exactly the thing that I tell people not to do. But because I'm so far behind, because we've had so much rain and snow, it's just I don't really have any alternatives. You've got to get out and do that if that's what you do for a living. But I felt it. Yesterday I was not moving as fast as I usually do because I was so sore. But I was clearing land. I was getting some of my beds prepared, and it's really tricky. One of the things that everybody wants to do right now, because it's spring and it's a warm day and the sun might be out, you want to get out there and get in the garden. But because we've had so much rain, the soil is saturated, and working in the soil can cause more problems than the progress that you're making. So what I always recommend to people is when you get out and it's like that, if you can squeeze a ball of dirt in your hand and it stays a ball, or it gets a little bit of a glossy surface to it, it's typically too wet to work. But what you can work it with is a rake and work very shallowly. And if you have weeds that have sprouted since last fall, if you had a little chickweed you see coming up all over the place right now, if you go over that lightly with a rake, you can eliminate a lot of problems in a very short amount of time. So one of the things that you can do that's really effective, despite the fact that the soil is too wet to really work safely, is to rake. Raking is just the lightest form of cultivation that you can find, but it solves a lot of problems in terms of all of those weeds that have established themselves from, say, November until now. And if you go out and look, you'll see there are a lot of things sprouted. I'm sure any of you who have perennials, any of you who have a lot of bulbs in the ground, crocuses should be blooming by now. I have daffodils that are blooming, snowdrops that are blooming. I have forsythia that I forced inside and it's in full bloom. So those are all indicators that soil temperature is sufficient for things to germinate. Cold, hardy things. So when I see crocuses blooming, I know I can put my peas in the ground. Now, right now, it's wet, and the peas that I have that are sprouted, I'm a little concerned because I could easily lose that crop. But they're in a raised bed. The bed's drained pretty well. I'm optimistic that it's going to be okay. Tomorrow will tell. Depending, they're saying we're going to get hard rain. That can lead to rot. It could bring all the mice out. I could easily lose all those peas. But in addition to peas, if you have reasonably well-drained beds right now, you can put in carrots. You can put in a lot of salad greens, early lettuce, early spinach. You can put in turnips. You can do radishes. Radishes are always a good thing to put in because they're super cheap and they sprout easily, and they will tell you if the radishes sprout, then your soil conditions are such that other things will probably make it. So those are a really good kind of indicator. And you can put radishes in a bed, just put a little, one little row in, and when they sprout, you say, okay, the soil's good, and you can put something else right next to them, just 2 inches away, because the radishes are going to be out of there in 21 to 28 days. So they'll make room for whatever is coming next. But I use those as my indicator of, that soil is going to be ready. I do the same thing with my compost pile. I have big compost piles. They're in various stages of decomposition. When I see things sprouting, I know that compost is ready to use. But it's not everything. If I see tomatoes and squashes sprouting, it's okay for tomatoes and squashes, but it's not cured sufficiently for other crops. Salad greens need a little more curing. They're a little more sensitive. So if you see those sprouting in your compost, you know it's ready to spread. If you see tomatoes and cucumbers and squashes, it may be warm enough, but it may not be decomposed enough. So the nutrient balance in there isn't exactly what you want it to be for optimum growing. So I use those kinds of signs. I look around, I see that little red glow on the maple trees when the buds are starting to come. That's another indicator that it's time to plant peas. Look at, Mother Nature knows way more than we do. She's been doing it longer. So I use those kind of natural signs. When you start seeing a lot of dead skunks on the road, that's another one. It's warm enough to start growing things. So those are all the indicators that I look for. The thing that I did wrong in the last 2 days was exactly what I tell people not to do, and that is just go out and start banging away at it. If you aren't obligated to take advantage of every hour of daylight, start slow, because it's really easy. It's just like shoveling snow in the beginning of winter. It's really easy to overdo it and then put yourself in a situation where you actually can't work the next day because you're too sore or had a heart attack or whatever it is. But it's really easy to go too far. And the other thing that people do in the springtime in terms of going too far is you're like, it's a beautiful day, the garden's ready, the soil's warm, I'm going to plant. And you just plant everything. So then what do you end up with? 100 heads of lettuce on second week of June. And that's a common mistake for people is they go out and they're just like, we're going to do the whole garden today. There's no need for that because you can't eat a whole garden in a day. So think about your timing and your planning in such a way that you do, okay, we're going to plant today and this part is going to be for that week, and this part is going to be for the first week in the second month, and this part is going to be something that I'm going to harvest in October, or parsnips that you're going to put in the spring and harvest the next spring. But think about your garden in terms of not doing everything in one day and not taking everything out all in one day. Tomatoes are the thing that people make the biggest mistake with because they see all these beautiful varieties in the seed catalog. So they order all of those, and the seed packages come, and now you've got 7,000 tomato seeds, and you're like, I got to buy more flats so I can plant them all. And then your table's full of tomato plants, and you don't have room for anything else. And then your garden's full of tomato plants, and then your kitchen's full of tomatoes. Right, now you're selling seedlings, exactly. So all of that preparation time in terms of thinking about how you're going to get out in the garden early in the spring, it's important to do that mental work as much as it is the actual physical work of preparing the beds. How many people do cover crops for the winter? You do winter rye? Yep. Anybody else? Oats? Yeah, good one.
Winter wheat.
Winter wheat? Yep. So now is the time when you're going to start to see regrowth. The winter rye is regrowing pretty nicely right now in a lot of places. Most of the people that I know who do cover crops, for some reason, it was late last year. Maybe because we had a long fall and everything was still producing, so they didn't get their cover crop in for the winter at an early time. But what happens is now there's winter rye, it's 3 inches, 4 inches. I haven't seen a lot of really well-established crops, but they are starting to grow. So in the next 30 days, possibly, The winter rye that's like this is now going to be like this, and it's going to be dense. You can't cut it with a lawnmower. It's that thick. So now is the time when you have to think about how am I going to incorporate cover crops into the soil in a timely manner so that I can actually get things planted and have those cover crops be adding the nutrition that I put them in for in the first place. So what I usually do is if I have, depending on what I'm intending for my crop to go in that space, I think 2 weeks before I'm going to plant or transplant into that area, I have to kill that crop. And the reason being, it takes about that long for it to begin to decompose and release the nutrients that it's holding and that you planted it to retain until that point. So if you have winter rye that's this high and you're going to use that space in 4 weeks, 2 weeks from now it's going to be like that. It's going to be hard work for a lawnmower, but it could do it. I like to work with a scythe. It's a good workout. It's a very effective way of mowing something that's that dense and that high. And it's not noisy, which is, to me, something that's really, I have more than enough time with the machines, so being able to work with hand tools is nice. But what I do with it is I'll cut it with a scythe. I'll rake it into the paths of where my beds are going to be. I'll rototill the beds, leave the cover crop, the residue, on top of the soil in the paths. That inhibits any weed growth there. What's rototilled into the beds will quickly decompose. It's not all of the nutrients, but it's a substantial amount, both above and below ground, whatever was in the roots. And then 2 weeks later, that will be decomposed sufficiently that I can plant into it. Other advantages, aside from the nutrients, is that it kind of softens the soil, so it makes a much nicer tilth. And whether you're planting by hand or with a machine, it's much easier to get the seeds where you want them to be because the soil is soft and it's rich. So if you're doing cover crops, which I recommend, again, you want to think about the timing of it so that you're getting the most amount of nutrients, but you're also not impeding your ability to get things planted in the garden. Whenever you put fresh material in the garden, whether it be carbon, like shredded leaves, or whether it be nitrogen, like fresh green grass or cover crops, it takes a little while for the biology to kind of readjust itself. So you want if you're putting leaves or wood chips or something like that, it ties up nitrogen. It's carbon reacting with the nitrogen, and the plants need that nitrogen. If you go in the opposite direction, if you're putting nitrogen in the soil, green manures or fertilizers, it ties up carbon for a little while. So you want to build that tie-up time into your planning for planting seeds so that you'll get good emergence and good growth. As soon as they get in the ground, they'll germinate, and all the nutrients are there available to them. If you do it too soon, the nutrients aren't there, they're tied up in other molecules that the plants can't access. If you do it too late, then you're losing some of that fertility either by volatilization, it goes up into the air, or it dissolves and goes down too deep in the ground below the root zone. So there's a little bit of a timing. It's not as sensitive as that may make it sound. You know, you've got certainly a lot of leeway in terms of if you wait a week too much one way or a week early too much the other way, there's going to be a little bit of an effect, but it's not going to be a drastic problem. The other thing that you need to bear in mind at this time of year is just, most of us in the wintertime, we're not as active as we are in the summer for a variety of reasons. But there's a certain recovery time that's required to kind of build your body back up, to get it back in shape, to be able to be outside. We're more susceptible to the effects of sun, so you're more likely to get a sunburn at this time of year because your skin hasn't really adapted to it. Your muscles are more likely to be slightly atrophied after, 3 months looking at YouTube videos instead of being outside working in the garden. So it's important to start out slow and not push yourself too hard, because what happens is if you get 2 days or 3 days in a row, on the third day or the fourth day, you're going to have a hard time getting out of bed. You're like, oh, my back, my legs, my shoulders. That's how I was yesterday. I barely got to my cooking engagement. I was like, oh, I really don't want to do this. But it felt good working out with a scythe. You know, it feels really good to get out there in the sunshine and listen to the birds and start making some progress in the garden. But I paid for it, big time. The other thing, and we talked about this a little bit last year, ticks are out right now. So for those of you who are going out to work in the garden, be very aware that they're awake and they're hungry. I pulled 2 off yesterday. I was doing some work in the woods as well as in the garden. So they're out. So wear the right clothing, have a good check afterwards, either yourself or even easier if you've got somebody to check for you, because it's not something you want to fool around with. We had a mild winter. It's quite likely that this year is going to be a bad one for ticks, for mosquitoes, and for gypsy moths. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing that's a real issue right now, and this is less related to garden than just working out in the yard and doing your normal springtime landscaping jobs, poison ivy. You don't really see it, but it's still there. Right now, there's no leaves have emerged, or if they are, they're very small. But it's still an issue that can be a problem. If you have poison ivy on your property or in any of the areas that you're working at, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not actively likely to cause you problems. So if you're in those areas, think about it, be aware of it, because it's another thing that'll put a damper on your gardening. Soil conditions right now. I usually look at, we're obviously way above our normal moisture level for this time of year, just because we've had heavy rains fairly frequently. But the simple test is grab it in your hand, put it on your palm, and poke it. And if it falls apart, it's reasonably good indicator that you can plant in it. But if you grab it and squeeze it and you poke it and it stays a lump, it's too wet. If you smear it, put a lump in your hand and smear it this way. If it crumbles, it's workable. If it actually smears, if it's more like peanut butter than peanuts, it's still too wet. So you'll do some damage to your garden if you do too much work in there. Right now, you can go in your garden, if your style is to dig it every spring, you can go in there with a fork. A fork is much better than a shovel. A fork will, you're just doing a couple of small holes. You can still lift up a good-sized clump of soil and turn it over if that's how you like to manage your garden. But if you go in with a shovel, it has that smearing effect. And if you have high silt content or high clay content in your soil, it creates a physical barrier so that water and air won't flow through. It's kind of the same idea as making a clay pot. And when it's spinning and you're pulling it up with your hands, you're kind of sealing all the little particles into that inside and outside of the pot, so water won't flow through. So shovels are not good at this time of year. If you look at a lot of the farmers around here are spreading manure, and they'll go out with their tractor with a spreader and they just fling it all over the place and they leave it there. They're not plowing yet because it's still too wet. But a good indicator is if you see farmers out plowing their fields, that's a good indicator that if they know it's the right time, then you can pretty much surmise that your soil will be ready too. But it's really risky to go out with a shovel or a rototiller. Rototillers will do the same thing. They make this kind of smearing effect that kind of seals the soil in such a way that moisture won't travel through it as it needs to. So that changes the hydrography of the soil, it changes the biological activity. It causes a lot of damage when you get out there too soon when it's too wet. So bear that in mind. We're going to get rain tomorrow. According to the weather report that I saw, we're supposed to have 5 days after that, at least, that will be reasonably dry, although cloudy. So I would hazard a guess that Tuesday, maybe, would be the right day to get back out there and do some planting. That'll give that water enough time to kind of sink down into the soil or run off, which is not as desirable, but also just for that upper layer of soil to kind of dry out from sun and rain, from wind.
I put my vegetables all at raised beds. So don't those dry out faster?
Raised beds will dry out faster, absolutely. And that's why a lot of people, depending on the soil type that you're working with, if you have a lot of silt or a lot of clay, if you have low organic matter, raised beds can be a huge advantage. They dry out faster and they warm up faster. So you can actually typically plant earlier in raised beds. The drying out part is good at this time of year, but it's not so good in July. It means you'll actually have to water more. That being said, everybody has a different way. I always say there's no one right way to manage your garden. There's certainly plenty of wrong ways, and we're still learning. I mean, I talk with farmers and gardeners all over the country, and there are lots and lots of different approaches to it. But what you have to do is find the one that works for you, and I find that raised beds are really good. Not for every crop, but for what I do, for my system of farming, raised beds are the way for me to go. And yeah, they make a huge advantage in the springtime. I can't think of anything that wouldn't benefit, anything that you would normally plant at this time of year that wouldn't benefit from raised beds, simply because of that drying effect more than anything else. But if you're doing it commercially, if you're doing it on a large scale, you can't rely on raised beds unless you also have irrigation. Because, and especially these days, the last 3 years, if you didn't have irrigation in July and August, you were experiencing pretty severe losses in a lot of cases. Let's do questions. Anybody have any questions or? Yes.
I have a question about using seaweed for mulch.
Mm-hmm.
Was thinking of trying it in our community garden this year.
Yep,
Is it something you use?
definitely.
Any downside?
Yes. There are two primary downsides to it. The first one is salt. For a lot of crops, that's not a problem, but for some crops it is. What I used to do when I was doing bulk seaweed in Maine, I would take my truck and trailer down to the beach. There were no limitations back then. You could take as much as you wanted, and I would load them up, and then I would take them back to my farm, and I would spread them out, and it would literally be a half-inch thick. And I would spread it out over a wide area and let it get rained on so that the rain would kind of leach out the salt.
On neutral soil, not on your garden.
Right. Actually, yeah. In an area of my garden that I use specifically for growing organic material for my compost pile. That's all it was for. So I would spread it out and let it get rained on, and then I would rake it up, and I would spread it in the garden and let it get dry, and then I would rake it up again and put it through my chipper shredder. And it comes out, yeah, but it comes out as like coffee grounds, super fine. And it is really, really good for soils that are lacking in micronutrients. It has, reasonably good levels for an organic fertilizer, reasonably good levels of potassium and nitrogen, but has lots of like magnesium and boron and all those little tiny, you only need a little bit of it, but it's all in there. So the other downside of it, and the reason why I put it through the chipper shredder is seaweed has a remarkable capacity for absorbing moisture. So it may be, bone dry when you have it all spread out, but if you get a good rainstorm, it'll absorb a lot of that moisture. And if it's not incorporated in the soil, if it's only on top as a mulch, it's incredibly slippery. And it's also not pleasantly fragrant. So by chipping it up, making it into small particles, incorporating it into the soil, it doesn't smell bad, you don't slip on it, and those nutrients are much more quickly available to the plants. But yeah, it's a great fertilizer, without a doubt.
What if we don't do all those? Just use Craig's?
Just laying it?
Yeah.
Yep. So you'll notice that what Craig does is he lays it on the paths and on the beds, but almost always he covers it up with something else so that you're not walking directly on it. Because if you don't have that separation, and even when you do, if it's just seaweed and then leaves on top, and it's wet, it's dangerous. It's literally, like, you can throw your back out just walking down the path. So bear that in mind. But yeah, he stockpiles it out in back behind the garden, where it gets the rain, it gets the sun, it starts to decompose a little bit. If you go out there in the summertime and go to the seaweed pile, you'll see it's crawling with all kinds of crustaceans and invertebrates. It's loaded with life, and that's a good thing. That's exactly what you want. All of that is nutrients in different stages of accessibility. Some of them being alive still, and some of them decomposing other things, but yeah, exactly. But typically you see a variety of shrimp. They look like little pill bugs, and they hop all over the place, and they'll be there for weeks, off the beach, but they'll be there for a long, long time. But they're part of that decomposition process and making all of those nutrients more available. But yeah, if you can get it, if you have access to seaweed, it's definitely worthwhile. It's the cost of the labor to get it there, but it brings in a lot of nutrients, and they last for months. So it's worth doing. I'm sorry, someone else had a question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we used to use eelgrass on our asparagus bed,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't seem to bother the asparagus.
No.
Established asparagus.
Asparagus likes salt.
Just the weeds down
Yeah.
and it was just an easy way to mulch the asparagus.
Asparagus seems to like salt, and it is kind of a traditional mulch for asparagus to use seaweed and eelgrass.
Eelgrass
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot of the problems that I
Right.
On the salt and asparagus, my father grew up on a farm and pretty primitive conditions, so the ice cream was hand cranked. They always threw the ice cream water on the asparagus.
Really? Because that's made with rock salt.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
At this time of year, there's usually quite a bit of eelgrass in Millen and Stonington down on the beach.
Yeah. Yeah. Go down there with your pitchfork and a garden cart, and yeah, it's very quick. Anybody else? Any other? Did you have a question?
Oh, mine's kind of it's particular about raised beds.
That's fine.
Does that relate to anybody else? Well, I inherited about 10 raised beds, and some of them are really productive and flourishing, and others seem like they have dead soil, and I don't know if I should just empty those ones that don't grow.
Are they in boxes?
They're
In frames?
And replace the wood as you suggested.
Mm-hmm. Have you had a soil test done?
No, because there are 10 of them. Should I have 10 soil tests?
Nope.
I don't know which one to pick from.
It is kind of a dilemma, and you inherited them, so you don't know what
Exactly.
happened before.
Emptying them all out, putting them on the driveway, mixing it all up, clean them back.
You'd only need one soil test that way then.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's a perk.
But that being said, if there was some kind of contamination issue, if it's only limited to certain beds, then you might be putting it in all of them. So that's a tough question. How do you usually direct seed, or do you transplants? You may want to use those beds specifically for transplants, because there may be some kind of soil condition there that is inhibiting germination, but may not be a problem for growth. So the beds that have been productive for you, use those for your direct seeded crops, and use the other ones for transplants. And that will tell you pretty quickly. If the transplants fail, then there is a problem in the soil, most likely. And if that's the case, then just either remediate or remove that soil and start fresh. You have access to compost? So, yeah, it may be, I mean, germination's a tricky thing. It requires very specific, it needs temperature, it needs moisture, but, and it also needs reasonably clean soil conditions. So if you have a contaminant, or it could be that you have wireworms or grubs or something that is actually eating the seed prior to its emergence above the soil. So it could be any number of things. It may be a biological problem, it may be a mineralogical problem, it may be an actual contaminant. So until you know what that is, it's hard to determine what the best course of action is outside of just replace it all, which is probably the more drastic, least desirable, most amount of work, but a certain solution. It's like, okay, I'm just going to buy topsoil and compost and start fresh. Even when you do that, you're disturbing the biology that's there. You're actually literally starting fresh. So you have to reintroduce the microorganisms that are making nutrients available to the plants. So it can take a little bit longer. If you get good compost that's already biologically active, you can overcome those problems fairly quickly. But a lot depends on what the real problem is.
Do you inoculate your seeds?
Yes. There are a couple of different inoculants, actually more and more. It's becoming a really common thing. It used to be that 15 years ago, legumes were the only thing that people routinely inoculated. And the reason being that there is a bacteria that works in symbiosis with legumes that will absorb nitrogen from the air, and including the air that's in the soil, and build these little nodules on the roots. And when that bacteria dies, and they have a relatively short life cycle, that nitrogen becomes available to the plant. So if you're growing peas or beans or lupin or garbanzo or a couple other legumes, typically you don't need to fertilize that bed, nor do you need to fertilize the crop that comes after them. So what a lot of people do is they'll put peas in early in the spring because they'll easily germinate, or fava beans. They'll easily germinate in cold weather, and they'll grow, and you'll get a nice crop, and you'll be eating them in June. And when you harvest them, if you cut the stem off above the soil, the roots will decompose, and all of the nitrogen that they've collected will start to become available. Again, it takes about a week to 2 weeks. But all of that starts to become available to the crop that follows. So if you have peas that are harvestable in June, that's a great place to put in peppers or eggplants, or in some cases tomatoes, if you can hold off on the tomatoes that long. And put them in the ground, and all of that nitrogen becomes available to them, and they just flourish. For a lot of people who do early greens in the spring, lettuces, spinach in particular, they are fairly heavy feeders, and they'll take a lot of nitrogen out of the ground. So if you have an early greens crop, it's great to follow them with beans, who like warmer soil to germinate, unlike those salad greens. So you can build up your nutrients, particularly your nitrogen, by following those crops with beans, which will reintroduce it. And then if you really want to push it, you do peas again in the fall. You plant them in late August. And you may, depending on the weather, you may or may not actually be eating any peas in October, but your soil will be getting all of that nitrogen replaced back into it. Now, the problem there is nitrogen is highly soluble. So if you're not putting something in over the fall to hold it, all of that nitrogen, not all of it, but most of it will be lost. So if you can plant peas in August, harvest them in October until frost. They'll last a little bit through frost, but not much. And then put a cover crop in while the plants are still there. The cover crop is going to absorb all the nitrogen. It's going to go up into the plant material, into the leaves of the cover crop. And then in the spring, when that dies, whether you kill it or if it dies over the winter, that goes back down into the soil and it's available for your earliest spring crops. So again, you're looking at it, that's 7 months ahead of time that you're looking at managing that nutrient cycle, but it gives you a huge advantage in the spring.
First time, but on the raised beds, what do you recommend for the frames? And where do you get it at a reasonable price?
It depends on the scale of your garden. My raised beds don't have frames. I just make mounds, but they're 100 feet long. Nobody's going to go out and buy 200 square feet of lumber to square up the volume that I'm doing. In your case, and again, it depends. There are a lot of issues to take into account. If you're thinking about building permanent raised beds, the best material that I've seen is what they use for decking now. It's called Trex. So it's plasticized wood. They take, sawdust essentially, larger than typical sawdust, but wood chips, and they embed it in plastic. And it's what they use for making decks these days. It supposedly will last 30 years.
It doesn't leach into the soil?
No, it's stable. It's actually been, it is approved for organic certification. And it's one of the few things that has. You can't use pressure treated if you're trying to be certified organic. Around here, the best native wood, if you can find it, and if you can find it, then if you can afford it, is black locust. It will last for years, like 10 to 15 years. Cedar is good, not as good. There's a western tree. Redwood? There's another one that's fairly rot resistant. Red cedar, we have mostly white cedar around here. Red cedar is probably a little bit better, but again, you're talking about 5 or 6 years. So what I have done when I'm building boxed in raised beds is there's no shortage of lumber yards around. And I buy what they call slab wood, which is the outer side of the log before they get to the thicker ones where you can get a board. So it's bark on one side and it's sawn flat on the other. It's super cheap. You can buy it, in whatever length the log is that they're milling. So typically it's not hard to find it in 12 and even 16-foot lengths. And you build it as if they were shingles. You overlap the bottom one with the next one that goes on top.
Flat side in?
Flat side in, bark side out, yeah. And it's cheap enough, it's going to last, you'll probably get 3 years out of it before where you puncture it with your fastening material, screws or nails, starts to rot out. But it's cheap enough that that's affordable to replace it on a regular basis. But yeah, if you're doing something permanent, Trex is good.
Have you seen what the Noble Foundation does for raised beds that are framed for tires?
Yeah,
Is that effective?
it's effective, but there are, NOFA has not approved that because of the possibility of lead contamination. Yep. It's very effective. And people have been using tires. for making mounds for growing pumpkins or tomatoes, potatoes, people have been doing it for years and years and years. But there is, if it's a tire that's been on the road for a long time, to the point where, its best, highest use is as a raised bed, then it's quite possible that it's absorbed some contaminants. So that's why it's an issue. But if there's a lot of personal choice involved in this. And if you're not doing edible crops, it's probably as good as anything else, because otherwise it's getting stockpiled in a landfill or possibly being recycled, but not much of that is happening. So it's not a bad way to use tires if that's a resource. It'll last a long time. Yeah, yeah. It'll last a long time. But yeah, I know a lot of people who grow in tires.
If
Yeah.
you're looking for tracks, which at Craigslist,
Yeah,
tear down a deck,
right.
they might give it to you for free.
Yep. It is heavy. Yeah,
Yeah, right, it fills a dumpster and takes up space and other stuff.
yeah.
And Home Depot will cut it for you, because it mucks up their saws.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
They won't cut it?
No, no.
Plastic, so the high-speed saw makes melted plastic.
It makes melted plastic on the blade, exactly. Yeah, yeah. The best is a bandsaw is the way to cut that stuff if you have one.
Dave gets dunnage from United Filter Supply, so you have to be careful that it's not pressure treated.
Right.
A big pile of, he's doing 8x4s, so he gets that for free or you're free.
Mhm.
You have to just kind of swing by and ask them if they have a dunnage pile. They usually have their own row there, so they're odd lengths.
I know a lot of people use pallets. And pallets are very accessible. They're all over the place. And breaking them up is some work, yeah. And some do. So they're marked. It'll say MB, which is methyl bromide, which you do not want in your garden, or it'll say HT, which is heat treated. So if you see the pallets that have HT, typically they're American, then they are safe. And the idea, the reason they're treating them is that they're trying to kill any possible bugs or pathogens that might go from one region of the country to another. A lot of South American countries don't have the same kind of environmental controls that we, up until recently, have enjoyed. So they use methyl bromide in order to kill any potential pests that might come from one country to another. I mean, we see the effects of that all the time with the insects that are killing white pines, that are killing American elms, chestnuts. All of those are introduced pests. So the idea is that treating it will remove or at least reduce that risk. But nothing's guaranteed anymore. But yeah, watch out for methyl bromide. You do not want to have that around any of your vegetable plants. I use pallets a lot. I have a nephew who actually has a business making furniture out of pallets, and he's pretty diligent about not working with the methyl bromide ones. He also has a very interesting tool that makes breaking up pallets quick and easy. It's a long-handled, it's a single handle on top that goes into a fork, and you put it down on the beam and you just lever it back and it just pops them right up. It's an expensive tool, but for his business it makes a lot of sense. And if you know somebody who knows how to weld, it's probably a good side business. But yeah, I use pallets a lot in the garden. I use them for building worm beds. I have used them extensively for building raised beds. They're not as, typically they're only 6 inches, so you might have to use a couple of them. But it's free, so it's a good way to reuse. The other thing, my beds, I typically build beds 30 inches. Because for me, that I can straddle that, and I can work in the bed that way. I can go from one path to another without risking falling on a plant. And the pallets are typically 48 inches, so you can get a 30-inch slab out of each one of those boards pretty easily. But if you're doing the lengthwise part, 2 or 3 of them, you need this little stake in the ground to fasten them together. But pallets, I'm fully in favor of reusing anything that's a free resource, or taking something that would otherwise be a waste product and turning it into a resource. So it's a good way to go. There's, do you live nearby?
Whistle.
Yeah. There's a plumbing supply place in Westerly that gets 8-foot pallets on a regular basis, and they put them out in their driveway. So it's not Viking. It's on the wrong side of the tracks from where the train station used to be.
That's the one.
Yeah. So that's a good resource for. Don't take them all, because I go there regularly. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So what do you recommend for a good natural fungicide insecticide in the garden?
Fungicide, the kind of the standard is copper or sulfur. Neither one of those is copper certainly is not inexpensive, but a little goes a long way. Sulfur is good, very effective, but you have to be careful about not applying too much. What are you trying to?
Put in like basil, tomatoes, squash,
Yeah.
things of that nature. In the past, I used like lemon and water and some other stuff.
Yeah. Have you tried apple cider vinegar or white vinegar?
No, but I didn't hear of that.
Yep. That's pretty effective with fungus. Pesticides, I tend to try to find things that are really specific. I don't like using broad spectrum pesticides because with a more natural approach to farming and gardening, a lot of the bugs that are out there are actually helping you as opposed to causing problems. So if you can identify the actual pest that you're dealing with, it's much easier to be really specific about how to deal with it. If you've got aphids or whiteflies, then ladybugs are your friend. So if you can encourage them to be there, that can solve the problem. Nowadays, you can buy 5,000 ladybugs and have them delivered in the mail next day, which is kind of an interesting business on its own. If you have grubs, then there are certain things that you can apply to the soil. One of them is called milky spore, and
Terribly effective. We had a dirt lot.
in your lawn,
Or so bad, yeah.
yeah,
And I did Lucky Sport 5 years in a row.
didn't work.
No, and they're attracting stomachs and everybody else.
Yeah,
We now know. No. I tell him, I think I can sneak him in there, he's afraid that I'm gonna get attached to the cat, so. That she cannot have chickens. Because we have a heavy coyote presence.
right, yeah. And that's one of the things that seems to always happen is if you have one problem, sometimes the solution creates another problem as opposed to solving it. You may get rid of the grubs, but yeah, now you're inundated with dead chickens and turkey vultures.
I like your story about that you're pushing the bugs and leaving the remains of worms to the others, and also that you throw them in the blender and make it.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I did that too, it's like, okay, there, your friends will find you there, and they won't come back, but
yeah.
do that really, like,
There have been studies about if you have a particular pest and you kill it and then spread the remains around your garden, it will either repel the living ones, or as the dead ones decompose, they cause infection in the living ones. So because of that biological process, it actually ends up killing them anyway. So it's not the most aesthetically pleasing approach, but if it's effective, I'm all for it. But yeah, not many people have a blender just for bugs.
Bill, if you apply copper or sulfur, do you dust or spray?
It depends on the crop. So if I have, for instance, I use sulfur frequently for squashes, and they tend to take up a lot of space, so I prefer a spray for that, because I have a jetpack sprayer, and I can just do a large area in a short amount of time.
What's the water sulfur mixture?
Yep, yep. For other things, dust is better, but it's more labor intensive. You can put it right where you want it, as opposed to doing kind of broader. So it's a function of time and labor as much as anything, but also in some cases, a function of effectiveness. Sometimes you want to get up underneath the leaves as opposed to being on top. So in those cases, there are some powders that you can more reliably spread that way, or sprays that have soap so that you go up and the liquid part evaporates, so they stick to it a little better and they don't get knocked off by the rain. But yeah, it really depends on. There's good products for both methods, and it depends on what you're dealing with. Fungal problems are a big deal here close to the coast, because we've got plenty of moisture, we've got a lot of fog. It's all the things that fungus really kind of requires to thrive. So you see a lot of people trying to cope with that with sulfur sprays. There are some sulfur sprays that are certified for organic use. They tend to be more expensive. I think that may be some people taking advantage of that, but there are others that are not certified but also highly effective. So again, it depends on your approach. Sir?
So I went to Buckwood Farms a couple of years ago, and I was impressed with all the beautiful sunflowers that they had. So the following year, I planted about 300 sunflowers, and I got like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the birds and the deer and the rabbits and everything else ate them.
Yep.
Yeah, because I grew them inside to like 2 feet tall. But how do they grow them in the wild? What's the trick?
The trick typically is they have treated seed.
Treated seeds?
Right. So the seed has either an insecticide or a poison on them. You ever seen corn that's all pink seeds? That's what it is. And they do it in such volume.
I was gonna say, Vaughn, because they let the cows out there to trample them in.
Right.
I thought that had part of it to do with it.
Yep.
They also have electric fences up
Yeah.
to keep the cows in.
But
Yeah, we have just as much trouble with the birds and
the birds are the biggest problem. Yeah, it's basically putting bird food out, right?
Well, exactly, but you plant them and then, they get 2 inches tall and then the rabbits eat them.
Yep.
And they get any bigger than that, the deer get them.
Yep.
But seriously, I just took like handfuls and just put them out there. I covered them with netting, and it just stayed.
And you still lost them.
and we have
I don't know if people grow
so
them,
I don't know.
Wow.
so I don't know if there's a trick or not.
Netting is if you're doing, for people who do commercial quantities, that's what they do, is they'll actually put out netting that's that high off the ground. And then once the plants reach that height, then they can remove it and assume that there will be a lot of, it may not be 100% viability, but it'll be past the stage where they're extremely vulnerable. But, you figure, you put the seed down, there's birds, there's rodents, it's like the perfect food. Seeds are incredibly nutritious. And then the same thing when they're young, tender, delicious little sprouts. It's like, all the rabbits think you just made them a free salad. And chipmunks love them. So if you have, almost all the natural wildlife around here, it's great dinner for them.
Conveniently, the rabbits taste delicious as well.
Right.
It's just a change of plan.
As long as you go the next step, then, yeah.
I got a question about thinning, right? Sometimes I feel like it's less effective if I just leave them alone. Like carrots and lettuce and stuff, because the seeds are so small.
Yep.
And it's like, put them in, get it.
Uh, I, I am increasingly in favor of wider spacing as opposed to closer. So to me, thinning is important. With carrots, if you don't thin them, they start going like this. With salad greens like spinach or lettuce, if you don't thin them, up until they're about that high, they're absolutely fine. But after that, they don't get enough air around the plant, and you start getting rotting problems. So, have you been to you've seen some of the machines that I use for seeding? I have some seeders that are very specific, and they do what's referred to as singulation. So you're rolling it down the aisle, and the axle has a little hole in it, and the seed drops in the hole, and it drops it right there, and then the next one there, and the next one there. It's very precise. And you can arrange those with different settings so that you get the spacing that you want. That being said, sometimes you get 2 seeds instead of 1. In some cases, that's not a problem. In most cases, it is. If I am planting in cells in plastic trays, I may put 2 seeds in each one, but once they're emerged, I pick the tallest one and I cut the other one off with scissors. 1 seedling per cell. And the reason is you want all of that nutrition that's in that soil in that little compact space to be available to that one plant, because it will seriously slow down the growth if they're in there for 3 weeks competing for all of those nutrients. And the same thing is true in the garden. If they're too densely planted together, then you either need to fertilize and water more in order for them to have all the resources that they need, or you're going to have stunted plants. So I think thinning is important. If you're doing a lot of carrots, carrots are one of the few things that I broadcast to seed. So I'll have the seed in my hand, and I just shake it over the bed like this, walking down the bed. And if it looks like it's thin, I'll come back the other way and do it again. And then once they emerge, I'll take a rake, and I'll run it down, and I'll kill every other one, because I want them to have as much space as possible. Carrots are tricky because the seed is so small, they have a very long germination time. Just when you're about to give up and think you got to plant something else, you'll start to see a little bit sprouting. But it's really, really hard to plant seeds, carrot seed, without getting it too dense. So the only effective way I've found is to actually plant it as thinly as possible and then kill a few of them in order to get that right spacing. I've tried that, yep. It does seem to help a little bit, and it certainly makes it more visible. But I've done it long enough the way that I do it that I can kind of judge pretty well how to get that. And I know people who use mechanical seeders, and you can buy pelleted seed, which carrot seed, it's really handy because the pellets are big enough, they're about the size of a radish seed, so it's easy to do one at a time. I've found that some of the pelleting processes actually seem to impede germination. If you don't keep it just the right moisture, the seed can actually die before it emerges through that clay. But that's a good way to kind of simplify that process. Carrots are tricky.
Last year, I tried to grow carrots, and I got the Berkey seed tapes.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tried those and had
Yep.
success? I did not.
What happened? Did they
Nothing
germinate?
happened.
Nothing
I
happened?
suspect I did it when it was too warm,
Yeah.
but I was wondering if you had any tips on using those seed tapes.
The seed tapes they're really kind of an interesting technology. And I know people who make their own, basically toilet paper. You put the seeds in, fold it, and then you can lay it out. But the trick is that they need to stay moist, consistently moist. And the paper can either act as a sponge or a wick. So it can absorb more moisture, but it can also, if it's exposed to the air, it can pull the moisture out of the soil and away from the seed. So the best way that I've seen is you have it on like a roller, and you stretch it out, and you put it where you want it to be, and you water it, and then you cover it with compost or some other kind of mulch. And that will maintain that moisture level until you get decent germination. Yep, yep. But carrots are tricky. Carrots are a very hard crop to get started. Once they're started, no problem, because they send out these beautiful long, very, very long tap roots. And they can find water easily, but if they don't get it in that first 15 days or so, consistently, not too much, not too little, that's a crucial time for carrots. They're really tricky.
Thinking of growing carrots in boxes, like framed in.
Framed in but bottomless.
Bottomless, right.
Right.
And possibly with a shower door
Yep.
top.
Yep.
Is that a terrible idea?
No, no, it's not. Remember that they don't need really high temperatures, just to start them, yeah. Warm soil to start, and then once they're germinated, let them go, because they can tolerate very cool temperatures. The whole thing with their germination is, it's got to be warm enough, typically 60s to 70s, and it's got to be consistently moist. Carrots, they will put out their taproot, and if they dry up one day, we'll kill them. One day of too much dryness. So if you can get past that point, because they grow a fast taproot. Typically, you know, if you have a carrot that's this big, the taproot's like this long. Yeah, they're very fine. They're hair-like. So when you harvest them, you break all those. You never see it. But the taproots on them, on all varieties of carrots, are much, much longer than the part that you're actually consuming. So they can access moisture very well once they get past that stage and the taproot is established. But yeah, germination is tough with them. Right, that's why I do that. So I'll spread my seed. Sometimes I'll spread a little compost on top of it, but not much. I like to be able to see the seed, water it, and then I have these rolls of craft paper that I buy. And I'll unroll the paper over the whole bed, water that, anchor it down with pipes or logs or soil or whatever, and make sure it stays moist. The paper will actually hold the moisture right at soil level. It'll, you know, when the days are warm, the moisture comes up out of the ground, it hits the paper, it falls back down, so it makes this little rainforest, very tiny microclimate. And, pardon me? Because it doesn't, newsprint would be good, but the fact that it's on a roll just makes it easier for me because I'm doing 50-foot and 100-foot beds. Newspaper will work fine, cardboard, and what I do is, you know, I'll peek underneath it. As soon as I see some emergence, I take it off and let them get the sun. But yeah, it's the only crop I do that all the time.
On tomatoes, it doesn't make sense to me why, if you have a pot and you have one plant in the pot and you let it grow 4 stems, why is that better than having 2 plants in the pot growing 2 stems each? It seems like if you've got 2 plants, you're hedging your bets better. 2 seems better than 1.
They're still competing for nutrients, but if the pot's big enough, right, if the pot's big enough, that's fine. Yeah.
You put them in the ground, plant them out that way.
In the pot?
Well, you take them out of the pot.
Take them out, yeah.
Leave the 2 plants together.
You can do that, no,
It seems like 2's better than 1,
in,
but you say 1.
in terms of hedging your bets, yeah. For my method, because again, if I'm doing it in quantity and I'm doing long rows and I use a weaving pattern to stake them all up, you could probably do that, but you get into problems with some plants are more productive than others. If you're saving seed, then cross-pollination issues come into effect, but for most gardeners who want more than one type of tomato, you want more than one type. There's,
I could have 28 plants together.
yeah. There's no, again, when you have 2 plants, they're going to be competing with each other. As long as you can keep up with their needs, then there's no real reason not to do that. I typically prune indeterminate tomatoes to one stem. For cherry tomatoes and plum tomatoes, I like 2 stems. For determinate, typically I let them do what they want to do. Whatever they're going to produce, I let them happen.
I've always heard 2 to 3, but I think one's better.
I like 1, yeah, yeah. But again, a lot of the tomato growing that I do is in a hoop house. It's in some kind of protected culture, and it's not uncommon in those conditions with indeterminate tomatoes. The plant will be 20 feet tall on one stem. So there's another technology that comes into play. It could be a ladder, but I use what's called a lower and lean system. So there are cables that run along the top of the house, and as the plant grows, it reaches the roof, and then the next week you lean it over a little bit, and the next week a little more, and by late September or October, there's 8 feet of plant lying on the ground, and then it's up on an angle so that you can still reach the tomatoes that are harvestable up on the top. But that's a technology that's developed over the last 10 or 12 years. And a 20-foot tomato plant isn't what everybody wants in their garden. I haven't done a lot of grafting with tomatoes. I understand the reason behind it. It's just not something that I've gotten into yet. It makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of commercial growers who do it. Are you familiar with tomato grafting? There are certain tomato varieties that have higher resistance to pests and disease than others. And if you raise those tomato plants, that resistance is inherent in the rootstock. So you can have that rootstock, and then you can grow another tomato that may be highly susceptible to certain diseases, and you graft them together. So you put the top of one plant on the bottom of another, and you get the qualities of the tomatoes from the top, and you get the resistance of the plant from the rootstock. So there's a lot of interesting experimentation that's going on, and there are certain root varieties that are already recognized as being really valuable for specific diseases and specific regions. So I think more and more you're going to start seeing grafted tomatoes being available commercially. Obviously, I think Johnny's might actually be offering them as plants right now. Yeah.
Burpees as well sells transplants. They're expensive.
They're expensive, yeah.
I grew a couple one year, and I thought I planted Jack's beanstalk plants. They grew so big and so fast, but they were good, but it's not worth $10 or something.
Right.
One plant.
Right. It's tricky. I mean, if you go to one of your not a commercial grocery store, but one of your high-end grocery stores, it's not hard to find tomatoes for $2 a piece. And at that point, it's like, oh, either I'm going to start growing my own, or I'm not going to complain so much about how expensive these are. But if you come here and get a pack of seeds, and there are some good tomato varieties here, it really makes you realize how valuable it is to be able to grow your own if you have the space and the time and the skills, because produce is really expensive now, and the really good produce is even more so. I mean, that's one of the things that one of the most gratifying things to me about working at the Giving Garden is knowing that the produce that we're growing there is really, really nutritious, and it's really delicious, and it's going to, it's serving a real good purpose. If you've been to a local sub shop and gotten one of those cardboard tomatoes, and you're like, really? Lettuce that tastes like nothing, tomatoes that taste like starch, there's nothing there but meat and vinegar.
I work at the Ledyard Food Locker. We have a hard Tomatoes, fine, but anything, you know, the tomatoes and lettuce, yeah. Other than that, fruit, they don't wanna be bothered. And I just don't know how you overcome that these are so much better than canned and frozen vegetables.
Well, there are a couple of issues involved there. One of them is that because people who are accessing that service don't know how good they taste, you know, if they've never gotten high nutrient, high flavor vegetables. So when you get to that, it's something that I've worked with a lot of kids, and they come out to the garden and you say, "Do you like peas?" "I hate peas. I hate peas." "Try these." And you pick it off the plant and you give it to them, and it's like green M&Ms. They love them. I've seen it with carrots. I've seen it with beets. When they get something that's fresh and nutritious and really flavorful, it completely changes your perspective about whether or not it's enjoyable to eat. But if you've never experienced that because you've never had access to it, then it makes it tough. But there's more to it than that. There are less and less people who are inclined to cook or actually know how to cook. That actually used to be something that was taught in school, that was home ec class. But there are a lot of people who don't know how to cook. And there are also, I saw this in Boston a lot because of the population that I was working with, they actually didn't have access to cooking facilities. They didn't have a stove in their house, or they didn't have the cooking utensils. So, when you're dealing with the food insecure population, there are a lot of factors that are involved in creating the access. And it's not just providing the food, but it's also providing the facilities and the education. I met a woman who runs a farm in New York called Soulfire Farm, and she's working with urban teenagers primarily and teaching them how to farm. And the first step in that process is actually they go out and they harvest something and they cook it together. And very often it's something that they've never seen before, And a part of the problem with a lot of our food distribution system is that what is available isn't necessarily always culturally appropriate. So if you have a large Korean population or Hispanic population or people from Alabama who are living in Maine, the crops that are available are unfamiliar to them. So they don't know what to do with them. So I don't know if you've ever eaten raw okra. Can't recommend it. But, that's the sort of cultural problem that you're trying to deal with. There are a lot of people in New England who don't like cilantro. But if you grew up somewhere else, it's like been part of your diet since you were a child. And so the cultural appropriateness is another part of that issue. So that distribution is a problem. And if you look at the food distribution system in the United States, the kind of bureaucratic one, most of the food that gets spread out by the agricultural system or the FDA or some of the assistance programs, it's the excess milk that was turned into cheese, or it's the eggs that didn't pass inspection and they're not suitable for market. It's dented cans, it's stuff that's going out of date. So a lot of the people who are most in need of the best nutrition end up getting the worst because it's free. And it's a real problem, but it's also, we're all part of the solution. There's been this debate going on for probably 2 decades now between quote-unquote conventional farmers and quote-unquote organic farmers. And the conventional agricultural system says organic agriculture can't feed the whole world. There may be some truth to that, but only in a large system. If you have a bunch of people with small farms and with gardens, organic agriculture actually can feed the world because you're not feeding the whole world, you're just feeding your little part of it. And that's enough. That's enough to make a difference. And part of the reason why there's that argument going on, that dichotomy, is because our system depends on doing things big. You know, we have massive tractors. We have a massive, complicated food distribution system. In the last 30 years, maybe a little more than that, we've come to take it for granted that we can have anything we want, anytime we want. I'm old enough to remember when it used to be special to get an orange at Christmas. That was a kind of part of the tradition was, wow, oranges in December. It's like fresh food. Now you can get orange every day of the year at a gas station practically. So, you know, we have this mindset that really isn't in sync with natural processes, and we take for granted that we can have everything we want whenever we want. And when you go to, if you're involved with a community that doesn't have that access, not necessarily because it's not available, but it's because they can't afford it, then it's a problem that we've created with the agricultural system that we have. People don't have access to land, so they can't grow their own, and they're dependent on having it brought to them somehow because they're not doing their own. But for people who are gardeners or people who are small farmers, they're part of the solution to that problem. And that's kind of what brought me into this. I think that there's a solution that can provide access to people, even if they don't have the economic means. That's what I'm trying to work towards. But I think that people who are gardeners, even if it's 2 4x8 beds in a community garden somewhere, they're part of the solution too. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid the political part, but it always slides in. Any other questions?